So that was great. Can we just start by reacting to Mark's session? Some of your immediate thoughts. Maybe your main takeaway. Would you like? Yeah, after you.
Hi. Mark, that was amazing.
Could you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Laura Maguire. I head up research and insight at Republican Media. Loved that from Mark, and being a qual researcher myself for the last 15 plus years, I related to that every bit of what you were saying. I think as insight specialists and strategists, we are basically just storytellers. And we have to tell the best story, like, to our clients and our brands that we work with. But I think what the main takeaway for me was that we have to disrupt our insight feed continuously. We have to step into, like, a protagonist is like the lead in any story. If we don't step into that person's role, life, journey to work, etc., we are just the narrators. Like, we cannot tell a story if we don't physically live that story.
I'm Alex, head of insight and comms at Ozone. So I don't come from a market research background. I work with digital data. So sorry to be that guy, Mark, but bad me. But super relatable, like, to me. I've worked in research teams in the past where we've used a lot of consumer market research to understand real audiences, and there's just, you can't really get a tell on what people are really thinking until you're talking to them. So it's really, like, important, and this is what is missing from, I believe, our Ozone data, is having that voice of a real person. We can obviously understand their online consumption habits, but having that voice there really underpins and becomes something way more powerful. The slide, especially on your, like, brand choices, is so relatable to me, because I've got, like, 2 kids, and, like, all of those things are just on screen. I'm like, yep, that's me on a page. But yeah, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Tom. I work at Havas Media in Manchester. I lead strategy for Havas. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Look, I think we need a bit of botherism, right? So don't, there's nothing wrong with digital data. Don't put it down. It's about what works and how we can do the best work. And I think that you get to the best work by using all sorts of sources. What really stood out for me, we talk a lot at Havas about the fact that we've obviously been really lucky in our industry to have such a wealth of data and technology, and that's enabled us to do better work, right? But perhaps we've gone a little bit too far, and I think both in research but also just in the way that we operate, we've perhaps dehumanized our relationship with people a little bit. We talk about digital IDs and segments, and we look at web traffic data, etc. We're big advocates at Havas of not calling people consumers, so it's not a consumer profile, it's not an audience profile, it's people, humans who you're trying to influence. And I love the fact, like, do people the respect of buy them a drink first. Do you know what I mean? Of going and talking to them and understanding them. Finally, the only other thing that stood out for me was that kitchen cupboard. If you were Heinz looking at that, right, I can relate to that myself. Someone there has bought the Bramwell's light mayonnaise, and then immediately gone, actually, it's the Heinz Seriously Good, and they've got 3. But you don't get that, like, that's not going to be in a DMP somewhere. That's not going to be on a web analysis platform. So yeah, I love that stuff.
I'm Lisa. I am a strategy and planning partner at Wavemaker. I think what Mark has said is so important in the world of AI and the world of data, in that you've got to have both elements of it. You would never just make your decisions based on qual, and you should never just make your decisions based on quant data. And I think the message for that's really important is you can use both. I imagine AI is going to be talked about a lot today because it's a media conference. And
it is.
Yeah. And actually there's a ton of academic research that's starting to come out about how you should use AI to kind of help with your qual research, but it's 10 a.m. so we're not going to do that. So I think the way I think about it, which is similar to Mark, is think about Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff. if you're not a Swiftie, you all know Taylor Swift, but many of her songs are written by Jack Antonoff. Taylor can still write songs brilliantly as a human on her own, but actually, sometimes Jack Antonoff enhances them. And so we should think of AI and the data available as a way to enhance our human behaviour, rather than it being one or the other. I think it's really important we don't get caught up in a really binary debate. Like, both of them are really important, and it's about enhancing, not replacing.
Which leads me perfectly on to my next question about AI. No, I'm kidding. We've called this panel Powering Up Media with Data and Insights on Real People Across the Nation. What does real people mean?
I struggle with that a little bit, because I think the intention's great, right, to talk about real people, but last time I checked, I think we're all real people. For me, like, I think, again, it's about not othering, which we're in the game of trying to influence people to buy stuff, right? And the only way to do that is to understand those people, and more often than not, we don't sit in those particular groups, because we're in certain bubbles, right? And we all got our own bubbles. It doesn't matter. We can talk about the London bubble, but there's a Manchester bubble, there's an advertising bubble, there's a bubble of my family and where I live and my friends. And so I think when we talk about real people, it's just about getting to know the people that you're actually trying to connect with, and understanding that your perspective on those people might not be right. Like you said about the flags, right? Okay, it's easy to have a perception from the news about what these people are like and stereotype them, because I don't move in those circles, but, you know, go and talk to those people, you know, and share their experiences. I think that's what real people means to me. So.
And just touching on that, real people have physical consciousness. You know, we feel and we think, and I'm not saying AI doesn't think, because that's literally in a nutshell what it is, but it learns to mimic behaviour, but it will never truly feel. So, yeah.
I think real people is, it's diverse, it's messy, it's reflective of where you are, it's where you're shaped from. Our MD, Emma, often teaches us, when I first started with research, of we're not real people, because we think the way we think is the way that everyone thinks. I remember years ago, we were working on a new business pitch, and the client had come to us and said, yeah, this product, mums are going to give it to their kids to, like, fill them up in between meals. And we all went, that is not what we'll do. And we went away and did some research with some mums, and they went, oh yeah, that's what we do. So it's really important to, like, remember that the way you view things isn't always there. And I think actually understanding that real people are really shaped by their environment. So I think from the research Mark referenced, 6 in 10 people say that their identity is linked to the place that they live, whether that's kind of a town or a city. So lots of things influence who you are as real people, and it's diverse and it's complicated and messy, and there's not one definition of a real person, and that's a good thing, because it'd be really boring otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, again, just like flipping it slightly, thinking about like my view of like what a real person is, and this is from my business operation head. It is if we're looking at online, like people reading real human-made content on real newspaper or magazine websites. So there's a connection there between the journalist or the reporter who's creating a story where they're talking to real people, and then obviously producing the content, and then someone at the end of it reading it because they're really engaged with it. So I see it as like we're all real people, and we're all different, we're all messy, and we're all over the place, like me this morning. But there you go. But I think it's understanding the motivation for why, if you're reading The Guardian or the Sun or whoever it is, like, why are you doing that? What are the moments in your life that are making you turn to that content? You know, is it the breaking news? Is it the sport? Is it the personal finance news or help that you might need with cost of living or whatever it might be? So, yeah, from my point of view, I say, agree, we're all real people, and AI will never replace that. Like, the worst thing with AI is Oxford commas. Everyone uses them now for some reason. I've never used one before, but everyone uses them, and M dashes. It's mad. But still a powerful tool, but very much in its infancy, I think.
So I'm going to take a couple of questions. Some are coming in. Where's Chris Hopkins? Chris, would you like to read out your question?
Hi guys. I just wanted to know what you think the worst generalisations are about people at the moment.
I suppose if you watch any news channel, it's that the vast majority of our country right now are inherently racist and, want to fly their nation's flags and don't want any immigrants in our country. That's a massive generalisation, and also that Reform would win, a lot of seats in the next election and has this kind of really growing fandom. And again, I'm not saying that that isn't the case, but that's a massive generalisation and sweeping statements that the news are continually putting out there.
I saw a really interesting video of David Tennant speaking at, I think it was the Royal Television Society, and we're all like, young people do not watch TV. They don't watch it. And he made a comment about, I don't know if anybody's been watching The Summer I Turned Pretty. I'm guessing a few of the girls. But he said that in their family diary last Wednesday, when it was the finale, there was a thing that said TT SIP finale, and he was like, what is that? And it was the finale of The Summer I Turned Pretty. And it's been put out weekly, so it's been on weekly. And he said, we keep saying that people don't want to watch an appointment to view programme, but they're doing exactly the same thing, just in a separate format. So it's really important that when we look at behaviours and we look at numbers, we understand what they're doing, because people are still doing things that you wouldn't expect. So yeah, let's just not be really sweeping with our media behaviours with people don't watch telly or people don't watch things on an appointment to view basis, because a lot of people turned out to watch the finale of that. I won't spoil it in case anyone's not been watching it each week. But yeah, I think that's a really important take out.
Just building on the programme, I haven't watched it.
It's great.
Yeah, but so generalisation is around people of different age groups are not interested in the same things, which is not true. So The Summer I Turned Pretty, someone in junior in our office sent around an email saying he wants to watch the finale at work. I know. So yeah, Lunch and Learn, yeah, and I think I don't want to say how old he is. I think he must be in his mid-50s. Our Chief Technology Officer was the first person to put his hand up. So it kind of proves that actually, it's an accessible, if anything, TV is accessible to everyone and everyone has an interest in it. I'm going to use one more example. I have to use this because I had a neighbour who was 96 years old. She died earlier this year. Sorry to use an emotive story. But I used to walk her dog twice a week, and we always chatted about this, that and the other, a bit of small talk. The one thing that we shared in common more than anything was that we were both huge fans of RuPaul's Drag Race. And honestly, I thought she was watching a different show, because she was like, oh, it's good, clean, fun, there's no swearing. I was like, Eileen, come on. But we talked about it every week, and it was like, that kind of generational thing just works across, everything.
It's difficult, right? Because look, we work in an industry where we need to quantify and show worth of what we do, and we're doing a lot of work on youth audiences with the BBC at the moment. And obviously that's a group, Gen Z often get commentated on as this big monolith, and they're this and that. And I think generalisations obviously often are more interesting because they're clickbaity. They're great to put up a big stat in a presentation. But in reality, this is a bit silly really, but there's over 7 million Gen Z in the UK. That's the same size as the population of Paraguay, for those who are interested. We wouldn't generalise the whole population of Paraguay and say they're this and that. But what we found what's interesting is, did anybody read, there was a piece by BBH a few years ago where they developed this cohesion score. where they looked at whether people agreed with TGI statements on the whole, and to see whether people actually aligned attitudinally. And it's not a perfect methodology, but what they found was actually, generational cohorts aren't really that cohesive in general. What unites people are interests, right? And that makes sense. Equally, though, I think there are some interesting things about generational cohorts. Like we found that Gen Z, they are the first population to really, as first generation, to sort of go through the world with a completely different set of rules to how life works. There's no more 9-to-5 job. There's no more guaranteed uni into a career. You don't, find your partner going down to the pub. It's all on Bumble or Tinder. I didn't get to go on that, unfortunately. So yeah, I think that sometimes we have to generalise, right? But I think it's about trying to escape the tropes and find what's interesting. And then final thing on that, I think also to get away from generalisations, like look for the variation from the mean and what's interesting. Because I think sometimes you can find bright spots in that. So it's not all about like what are the majority of people doing. It's like, well, if there's a small group of people over here doing something really interesting, can we predict that that's going to flow out? I was saying to Mark earlier, like there's no entrepreneur who set up a business based on there already being a huge demand in the market. Otherwise, the chance is gone. So inherently, there's got to be a bit of risk in what we do. I think as strategists. So.
And just on that, that is literally the definition of an insight: a bright spark that grows and embeds itself in a business. So yeah, completely agree.
Quick question from me before I go to another audience question. How do you determine what's an insight and not blindly following data down a rabbit hole?
I'm not sure. I always think a good insight is something you could explain to your mum and she would yeah, I get that. I'm going to use a bit of a example that is from a really, really old campaign. But years ago, the government did a campaign to highlight where if you were a victim of domestic violence, you could get support. And the media channel they used was the back of a receipt in Tesco. So you go and get your receipt and it's in there. And the insight behind that was that if you're a victim of domestic violence, you need to be reached in permissible media. So you need to be in a media channel that if the person you are living with finds it, you can go, oh, it's nothing like that. And I think you could explain that to my mum, who I'm not convinced has any idea what I do, or I could explain it to teenagers in a school that get it. Like a good insight, you don't have to explain, you just go, yeah, I get it. And I think that's the sense check you should have.
I think as an industry, sometimes we get a little bit up our own arse about what an insight is, and we have long sort of debates and about what it is. I think it shows up in the work, right? For me, an insight is just finding out something interesting and useful. If it helps us to do better work, it doesn't matter if it comes from a conversation, it can come from data. I think the main difference between big data and talking to real people is that big data can help you understand what's going on. You can see, there's a sales spike here, or this part of the country are doing this and that, and whatever. It doesn't tend to help you get to the why. So an interesting example, again from the BBC, a couple of years ago we were looking at, again, 1624 data, and we started to see that more and more young people were watching the Gilmore Girls. Don't know, anybody? Yeah, it was just going through the roof, and so that's interesting. That's an insight in itself, right? But it's what's going on there? It wasn't until we went out and spoke to these people, and they were talking about, well, actually, even though we didn't live through the period when that was created, it almost represents a little bit of nostalgia in crazy times. They're so, life is so hectic. It felt like they were almost harking back to a time that they didn't even live in, and that takes you to new places, right? Rather than just going, oh, right, well, there's a spike there. Well, maybe we air more Gilmore Girls. So. Yeah, I think there's a difference between the two.
I think I completely lost my train of thought. I was thinking about something else for a moment there, but sorry.
Just insight.
Remind me of the question again, Sam.
Good question.
I think I'm hallucinating.
It was
something
about,
that
yeah.
AI is. You can tell AI not to hallucinate, but you can't tell yourself to not hallucinate, which I'm now doing. Right.
Carry on, insight and following data down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, again, like from my perspective, we're a data business, so we've got a lot of data, and it's very easy just to be obsessed with analysing it all the time. But again, I think you've got to kind of flip it to think about, say, to Mark's earlier presentation, the kind of what is the emotive reason that people are, that might be encouraging the trend in the data. What's the thing that you need to dig deeper into? Again, like Eileen watching RuPaul's Drag Race was an insight that I wouldn't have got any other way without talking to her. So getting that humanity, I think, again, is super important.
That's brilliant. Let me take an audience question now. So I'm going to go to Christine. It's just Christine. Christine. Brilliant. I didn't mean just Christine.
Like Cher.
Yeah. That's pretty cool, actually. You should go by that now. Yeah.
So we heard from Mark about people making decisions that often seem contrary to the way they portray themselves. And my question is about techniques. How do you get to the real person when it comes to your data? Beyond talking, is there any other effective approaches or methods that you have to really understand the human outside of your data?
I think outside of talking, it's purely observation. And I think Mark would probably agree with that, given that's the core of your business, being in people's homes and filming, people making their kids dinner, putting them to bed, etc. How much we work with a water company, like what is your water consumption on a day-to-day basis? Like either going into people's homes and literally just standing back and observing, or them filming themselves, because what people say they do and what they actually do are completely different things.
I think, again, and again, thinking about what Mark was saying about encouraging people to complete these kind of digital, almost diaries, I guess, is one of the things that we've been trying to do within our digital platform, is to kind of, okay, we've got all this great reader engagement data, but how can we kind of poll our audience with particular questions? So that's something that we're trying to encourage more of, to get into the kind of motivations behind why someone might be engaging with a particular brand or a particular type of content. So that's one way of doing it that would work from a digital perspective.
I think the way to think about it is, I think watching's really important. So not just asking the questions, but observing what's going on. One of my favourite things to do when I'm working on a brief is, if I'm working on something in the supermarket, is just spending a bit of time loitering down the aisle, taking some pictures. I no longer pass as a student doing research when I get asked this, that's a problem. But I think watching and observing, but the other thing is a triangulation of data, so don't just take one data source as the sole truth, combine other bits of elements and think of them of different dots that you've got to compare. So watch, don't just speak. I think I loved the example that Mark used about doctors not just looking at the data, but they look about how you respond, and police officers kind of watching and doing that. And I think also then triangulating the data, so make sure you look in multiple places. I think as a strategist, it's your responsibility to expose yourself to lots of different things. So you need to be reading vastly, listening to different things, reading things that you might not necessarily agree with, because that's the way that you kind of fill your kind of brain with things that will help you with that.
I mean, my dad literally watches GB News on the regular purely to try and understand this entirely different viewpoint that he has on the nation.
Just a quick one. I used to have a colleague who worked at What If, and I stole this gleefully from her, but she talked about a technique that they used to use for ethnography, which was not just going finding the people that you want to connect with and talking with them, but looking at the relationships around them. So they talked about people who have deep relationships with the people of the category and people who have weird relationships with the people in the category. I mean, one slightly strange example she gave was when they did a project for Durex, and so they obviously some of them were the big consumers of the product. They went and spoke to people who consumed the product, but they also went and spoke to sex workers who used the product in a different way. They used, I think she said they spoke to an artist who made things out of condoms. So, like, you know, there's different ways into understanding people's relationships with the products, and whilst it's great to talk to the end user, like, sometimes it's good to sort of go a little bit more lateral. So, yeah.
There's a great question on here from Anonymous. Just shout if you do want to read it yourself. But it was, how do we convince a board level to take note of sticky human feedback from 2 to 3 real people when it's not as impactful as large representative data? I think there's something also interesting in here about me search, right? You know, people who are or bringing a worldview to the table. Maybe that is based on your personal experience. Maybe you're working with a client who thinks, you know, because my family interacts with X in some way, this is how we should do it. How do you counteract me search? How do you bring big data into things? How do you balance that gut versus what the data's telling you?
I'm not sure this. I'm just going to go back to the board member encouraging them to kind of understand it in a language they probably don't understand, which is by relating to people that are ultimately using their products. I used to work for a newspaper or a news publishing business, and one of the things that I was always very impressed with, as well as the market research team who did a lot of proper market research, was that the editorial team would invite actual readers into editorial meetings to get their views and their feedback on ultimately the product that they were buying once or twice a week or consuming online. So I thought that was a nice, and these are senior journalists, these are guys that are, or you know, men and women who are editing newspapers with lots of they're very time poor and they've got a lot of things going, but they were making time to talk to the readers that were ultimately paying their wages. And I thought that's a good example of how to I don't know how you would actually set that up, but it's one way of getting them to understand it, if that makes sense.
I think we also need to remember that people that work on a board are also real people too. So they're not robots who are only programmed to think about with data. And if we treat them like humans when we present and think about their concerns and are empathetic to them, we can factor it in. I'm working on a client at the minute, and it's the first time they're advertising in an area, and there's basically loads of people involved who want to see the media plans but have never worked in a media agency. And actually, treating them like people is the way that you get them to do that. These people, even though they might be numbers driven, will still make decisions based on how they feel. That's not just a board level thing, that's humans. The humans make decisions based on feelings and storytelling and humans. So don't villainize people on boards, be empathetic to them, and also remember that they're real people too. They might be different from the people that are buying your frozen pizza, but they're real people and have all of that. So if you treat them like that, you're more likely to get them bought into what you're thinking.
I think finally, importantly on that is that, I mean, look, I get it. We don't always have the time and resource to go and scour the country and sit in people's living rooms, right? And so I think you have to draw a line somewhere, and sometimes that's about gut, but it's about expanding as much as possible. And part of that, I think, is about diversity within the agencies that we work in, having diversity of thought. Do you know what I mean? Not sitting in a room and chatting to another middle-aged white bloke about what's going on, you know, in Scotland, you know, or wherever it is. So I think the more we can get better at creating agencies that are more representative of the UK, then all right, it's not perfect, but at least we're making sure that there's a diversity of thought in the room.
That's great. I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, just a quick question. Just leading on from human texture, the panel, thank you very much, and great presentation as well. Talking about not making assumptions, generalizations, tropes, and you've just touched on having diversity of thought in the meeting. In your positions of power, heads of, and making strategic decisions for clients, what are you doing to, or how do you ensure that you're capturing the voices and the thoughts of those segments of the population that aren't necessarily reflected in your agencies or in the media industry as a whole? Because that hasn't changed for a number of decades.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big topic for us working with the BBC because, they're tasked as part of being a public service broadcaster to connecting with and delivering value for everybody in the UK. And so we're really hot on the fact that any research we do, we work with specialists, cultural consultants, around social mobility to ensure that not only are our surveys built so that they're inclusive and accessible, not everything is done online, etc., but also that the panels and the respondent bases are as representative as possible. And yeah, as I say, I think that's really important. And I think just understanding that, again, talking about that average can often lead you to what looks like an average person, but actually the interesting stuff is in the fringes. So it's actually when you get bespoke briefs to go and talk to specific groups, then you can understand them better. So.
I was just going to completely agree with you, because at ROM, obviously we ourselves also work with data specialist partners to make sure any data we have is fully representative, but in the same breath, any data set that I get back, I am physically looking at that with my own eyes and asking who is missing here, who is missing from this data, because only by physically looking for who's not there do you then realise that it's maybe not as nationally representative as you're led to believe.
I think two things. The first thing is, I think as kind of senior people within our businesses, we have the responsibility to teach junior people the way to do it without the data and the tech and the AI. And that's not just in insight, that's in media planning. Unless you understand the kind of bricks and mortar of it, you can't have a kind of critical eye to it. So I think it's teaching people how to do that. The other thing is get away from your desk and go and speak to people and make a really conscious effort to do it. We were working on a project a few weeks ago, and we were tasked with coming up with ideas to convince construction workers to become further education teachers, so go to colleges and teach further education. And we did a brilliant thing with their research company, and we did Dragon's Den with construction workers. So the ideas that we had, we got them to feedback on it. Lucy, who is the planning lead on it, said it's the most nervous she's ever been to present to a bunch of builders. But actually, like, that feedback we wouldn't have got just from us looking at it. There were certain things that they picked up on that we would never have picked up on. So get away from your desk and go and speak to people, and make sure that the fundamentals of insight and gathering aren't just taught through tools, but you teach it through principles, because then people learn to be critical and know to assess it, and don't just say, oh, the computer says that, so I'm going to do it.
And I guess from my perspective, obviously we're not doing any kind of like in-field research as such as at the moment, but I guess it's like working again with a team that have a better reflection of what Britain is today. I think is important. I mean, I'm 45, but the people that work in my team are Gen Z and from diverse backgrounds, and they can tell me stuff that I don't know, and I can tell them stuff about, I don't know, RuPaul's Drag Race.
Or life without the internet.
Oh God, yeah.
I also turned 40 recently.
Yeah,
so.
dial-up was is still very memorable.
I wish I could get through all the questions. There's thank you so much for submitting them, and sorry I haven't managed to reach some of them. it's maybe something we can cover in I'm looking at Jack, our reporter in the front row, maybe something we can cover in the Media Leader. So watch out for us on that. Our reporters are writing up the event, and with all of these questions, maybe it's something we could ask you guys afterwards. But also, we're going into a break now, so come and holler and collar all of the panellists. Yeah, please stick around. We've got 2 stages, a masterclass room, loads going on, loads of AI content, loads of data content. So enjoy the break, and I'll catch you very soon. Thank you very much.